Any attempt to influence a teacher will be regarded as canvassing. Guidelines are being drawn up for schools on how they can handle it. The written exams this summer have been scrapped and replaced with a system of calculated grades. Social distancing rules will not apply on board an aeroplane, according to an aviation analyst. Ryanair plans to run 1,000 flights a day from the 1st of July, compared to 30 daily flights in operation today. All passengers and crew will have to wear masks and will be subject to temperature checks. Alex Macheras has told The Hard Shoulder Ryanair has a range of new measures it intends to apply.
The airline CEOs are now in a position to say, we're allowed to have you on board, we're allowed to have you all sitting next to each other. We assure you it's a safe environment as any, and therefore the social distancing rules will simply not apply when you're in the confines of an aircraft cabin.
And Facebook's flagged more than 50 million pieces of misleading COVID-19 content. The social media networks also revealed it had to remove 2.5 million posts since March the 1st, selling medical items including masks and test kits. It's been adding warning labels and directing people to the World Health Organization fact-checking site. That's it for now. More in an hour.
News Talk Weather.
Thanks to the AA. For great value van insurance, go online to the aa.ie.
Tonight will be dry in many areas with clear spells. Some isolated showers in the north and east. Lowest temperatures of -1 to +4 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
Off the ball. This is News Talk.
Hello there, you're welcome along to the show this evening. On the football show, that's between 9 and 10, we will hear from Pat Nevin and Miguel Delaney. After 8, Professor Paul Rouse with his latest lecture in our series on the history of sport. This evening, week 7, it is all about money, which makes the world go round, and that was very much the case once sport started realising people would pay in. And on that theme, sport is returning. UFC 249 went ahead in Florida on Saturday. Kevin Ioli of Yahoo Sports will tell us how it went. 53106 is the text number. We are at Off the Ball on Twitter. Richie McCormack, hello.
Hey Joseph, you alright?
Very well. And Ronan Mullen with us as well. Good evening.
Joe, how are things?
Very well. Off the Bull continues as The Last Dance continues to enthrall and capture the imagination. I've watched the latest episodes, Ronan. I have things to discuss.
Yeah, I think, well, the response I'm getting, it would seem to be people's favourite 2 episodes. I'm not sure. There's been a bit of variance on that, but generally positive feedback, I think.
Yeah, very positive. So, one of the lingering memories, March 1993, Bulls against the Bullets. Step in per role, LeBradford Smith, who's just doing his thing. You know, he's not a superstar, LeBradford Smith. He scores 37 points. MJ scores 25. It's not his greatest evening. And they're walking off the court and LeBradford Smith says, "Nice game, Mike." He doesn't mean much by it. He's not being sarcastic. It's not dripping with sarcasm. He's just saying, "Nice game, Mike. I'll see you tomorrow." They're to play the next day. This, to Jordan, is a disgrace. A thundering disgrace. It's a slight. Can you believe that guy? He's frothing at the mouth to his teammates. Can you believe that chump? He just came over and said, "Nice game, Mike." What does he mean by that? What do you think he means by that? I'm right, haven't I? He's goading me. And so the next night he says, "I want LeBradford Smith. I want this kid. I'm going to crush him. I'm going to score what he scored yesterday in the first half," which he does. He goes out and he destroys the kid. And a couple of years later, I'm not too sure how many, but LeBradford Smith's talking about this whole episode and makes the point, you know, the funny thing is I never even said that to him. I never even said, "Nice game, Mike." And various reporters hear this and they go over to Jordan and they say, "You know, that LeBradford Smith thing, he doesn't actually think he said 'Nice game, Mike' to you. Did you make that up?" At which point, a smile comes across Michael Jordan's face. Yeah, he did make it up. Jordan cultivates this kind of willful, productive, but paranoia is all you can call it. He created this whole thing. This poor kid never even said, "Nice game, Mike." Created it, crushed him in front of 20,000 people the next night. And for Jordan, that's just another day at the office. This Ronan Mullen is how he operates. He takes every slight he can possibly grapple with, every perceived slight. And this is the fuel. Like the theme, which I think, you know, it became almost a parody in the last episode, but the theme right across the series has been somebody challenges Jordan, often in a fairly slight way. I mean, not really challenging him, and he goes berserk and then crushes them. But like the most recent episode is about 5 or 6 of those stories. There was a coach, and you remember the coach who doesn't say hi to him in the restaurant, and Jordan thinks, "Well, I have to destroy you now." And it is staggering because he's such a creative force. I wouldn't have thought he could operate on anger.
As our former colleague Oisin Langan pointed out on Twitter the other day, there is a startling resemblance to Alan Partridge in the way he carries on, because pretty much every anecdote now ends with, needless to say, I had the last laugh.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought you could ever compare Michael Jordan and Partridge?
Poor old Bradford Smith, though, comes into the league in the first round. You know, a little bit of pressure, but you know, this was his coming out party. This was his chance to make a statement. And what I should point out was a losing effort, Joe. The Bullets lost that game, and yet Michael Jordan stropping out into the dressing room like Ruud van Nistelrooy because he didn't score a goal. He doesn't feel like he contributed. And then the other footnote that these NBA players have to fly cross country, basically Chicago to Washington, to play the next game. And I can just imagine Michael Jordan not enjoying the in-flight entertainment, just stewing over this poor kid that he's going to crush that night. And needless to say, as Richie said, he did that. And there's so many other ones. Like, I can just imagine Isaiah Thomas, for one, would be an interested observer, pacing through his pantry, watching BJ Armstrong and LeBradford Smith get way more airtime than he did for some reason. But the whole, I think Owen Sheehan had a good sort of paradigm of how the whole thing goes, where someone says an innocuous remark about Jordan, and that fuels the fire for Jordan to subsequently, you know, quench their fire.
Yeah. The thing which really jumps out, though, you know, because Jordan is just this creative force as well. You know, he's such an expressive player and he's a genius, clearly. And you have the anger and you have the I will crush this kid, followed by the montage. That tends to be how this tends to go in terms of the documentary. But like, I would really associate playing angry with more of a destructive performance. Like, I would think Roy Keane could take anger and funnel that in the right way. You know, it's a tension if you're angry. Whereas it's amazing in the Jordan documentary, there's this anger, this kind of seething resentment, and then it cuts to him flourishing and in a state of flow, and he's creative and he's deft and he's timing and his rhythm. And there's a certain genius in how he's able to incorporate all that anger and express it in such a lovely way. So I found that very interesting. He's one of the, like, I don't think Messi plays necessarily angry. Maybe he does at times, but generally it's not something you associate with creative players. I know Jordan was forceful as well, but ultimately he like Dennis Rodman could play angry, I suspect, is what I'm kind of, you know, it's not.
Maradona was a creative player and angry.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's impossible, but like this is how this is Jordan's, like, this isn't like, oh, those 10 times Maradona got angry and ran the pitch. This is like his day-to-day existence of being angry, Ronan. That's what it appears to me to be like.
Yeah, it's interesting, and obviously the biggest takeaway for most people was that closing montage at the end of episode 7, where he has this emotional breakdown. And the pre-publicity before this was one of the clips where people were wondering what those tears were over. And it turns out it was just his whole career. Like, he was sort of overawed by it. He knew he was playing the villain to a certain extent. It was a necessary evil to play that way, both with his teammates and with the opposition. And Jason Hare mentioned that. Jason Hare's the director sort of steering this ship. And he said that scene that's in the documentary came 45 minutes into the entire process. So all the other stuff came subsequently. And to think that was sort of like a starting moment for this whole Last Dance, I'd say Jason Hare was thinking, I've got something really special on my hands here. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to next week. I think they've teed it up really nicely. And the Messi comparison is an interesting one because they are analogous. Like, it's so easy when the timelines are converging now to sort of see Jordan as one entity. But the Jordan of the 80s, it was just magical, like ridiculous athleticism, then into the 90s in his prime before he stepped away in an Eric Cantona way at the peak of his powers, and then took that little sabbatical. But then when he came back, he was like Messi is now, where he wasn't all singing, all dancing. He was picking his spots, still dominating games, but he was playing with his head more than his body, if you know what I mean. And it's going to be interesting to see that in the 97 and 98 series, where he wasn't exactly taking over games like the young Jordan did, but he was there when it mattered in the clutch, closing them out. And that was the key ultimately. And
I know we're going to play a clip of Off the Bull later on, which is the accompanying podcast that you guys are doing to the series. And I think it's this very issue that you'll tease out and discuss in the clip we'll play later on after Paul Rouse between 8 and 9. But I think, how do you interpret the tears of Jordan? Because they don't really explore it with them. And I'd say it was difficult. They're 45 minutes into this 8-hour interview process. They don't know him that well. And suddenly he's crying. And they leave it in the edit where he says, break. As in, I'm getting up now, we're not going any further with this. And I can imagine they don't feel like they can say, no, you're crying. Why exactly are you crying? So that's a little bit open to interpretation. Is it a guilt that he treated his teammates so horrifically in some respects? Or is it more of a, not guilt, just a sadness that had to be done? I don't feel guilty about it. I'm sad it had to be done, but I don't regret it. I'm not sure he regrets it. I come down more on the sadness side than the guilt and the regret side.
Yeah, just a side note there, I totally agree. It was a great thing by the director to leave that bit in where he says break. It plays so nicely on screen. But no, I think you're right. He's just accepting that, as I said, it was a necessary evil, and no one really speaks warmly of it in this documentary.
No.
What have we got? 8 hours of footage to play with now, and no one's going, me and Mike were buddies. There's nothing like that. He took winning over friendships, and ultimately that was it. And Charles Barkley, who's never afraid to take the contravening side of things, was saying he described what Jordan did as selective prosecution. So basically, he was picking on certain players, like he was picking on Steve Kerr and Scott Burrell. He wasn't picking on Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman. He knew the guys he could get a tune out of, and he knew the guys who needed that. And conversely, when he was on the '92 Olympic team, or in the late '80s, he knew what he was dealing with. He had better players then. He didn't need to get invested in this kind of stuff. But to sort of tip them over the top, he had to tap into maybe the lesser players in the team, and that's ultimately what he did. And I think that's probably where the sadness lies, that he made a distinct decision there. And I'm sure he doesn't regret it one iota. Like, he's got the bank balance to back it up. He's got the championships to back it up. And the esteem, like, I still have to pinch myself, like, that 22 years later, Michael Jordan's once again at the centre of the sporting universe. And could things have played any better from his perspective?
I know.
It's unbelievable.
It's actually unbelievable. But have you started it yet, Rich?
Not yet, no.
There's some of the most gripping footage is him in training where he's picking on the 2 or 3 guys. He feels he needs to toughen up. And he's like, if they can't do it when I'm ragging on them in training, they can't do it when it really comes down to the crunch in a big game. But it's not, if you were Jordan, it's not footage you want to look back on, because it's kind of nasty and he's really going at them. Steve Kerr, poor old Steve Kerr, he doesn't deserve this. But I guess it was a means to an end. Anyway, Last Dance, it's on Netflix. It really is recommended if you're not caught up with it yet. We should start with the news round. Richie, CPA, GA Storage, CPA have done a survey of their members.
Yeah, and they say the majority of club players are willing to return to play before a coronavirus vaccine is found. 57% of those surveyed by the CPA voted in favour. 63% said they'd train or play if every player and official was temperature checked before each training or match. However, 60% said they would attend club games as spectators, but only 33% would go to an inter-county match in the same capacity. The CPA say they're passing on their findings to the GAA's COVID-19 advisory group.
That doesn't read all that positively to me. So, a majority would be willing to return. 57% surveyed said they would be in favour before a vaccine is found. That still means, what, 33% wouldn't return?
Not necessarily. Problem. There's 20-odd% wouldn't return, and another 20-odd% are in the don't know category. The don't knows are actually pretty significant, almost across the board in this survey I was looking, because it's not as if they're in the 3, 4, 5% range. They're all still wavering. They're all still about 20-odd% in all of these categories and all these questions that they ask them. So there's a lot of convincing one way or the other to do with the club player.
So is it about 20% no?
Yes, I'll double check that for you now, actually, because I have it open in front of me. But yeah, it is knocking around that country. Yeah, it's the substantial numbers behind the don't knows were kind of what struck me out of all this.
20% just saying a flat no until the vaccine pretty much puts paid to any hope to get back playing. Like, you can't really proceed in the club championship without a fifth of the players. I suppose the one bit of hope is that the numbers will increasingly come under control, we hope, and we'll have next to nobody being infected. The zero prevalence tests may show that we've greater herd immunity than we had thought. There may be effective antivirals. It's probably a fluid number, but once it's anywhere near 20%, who are saying, no, we don't want to return, it's not going to happen.
21.9% saying no, which is 659 of those surveyed. 21.2% saying don't know, so 638. So the numbers between don't know and and a direct no are only, less than 21 people. surveyed. So there's very little wiggle room across the board, as I say, between knows and don't knows. Don't knows again for would you attend as a spectator are still knocking around 13%. Okay. And similarly for their inter-county matches, they actually go up to 16% for don't knows. So again, there's a lot of convincing of the club players still to do before they actually head back towards the pitch.
Even if every single one of those don't knows become yeses, that's still too many who don't want to play, I think. Premier League, meanwhile, will this ever end? Will this ever end?
It will end, but it'll be ugly between now and then. Clubs opposing the use of neutral venues to play out the season, they've been offered new hope by England's senior football police officer. It's believed as many as 12 clubs are against the proposal of using between 8 and 10 neutral venues for the remaining 92 games of the English top flight season. But Deputy Chief Constable Mark Roberts of South Yorkshire Police previously told opponents of neutral venues to get a grip. But now he says, following a positive meeting between police, government and football last night, we will be jointly exploring a range of options to identify a way forward which minimises any risks to public safety and unnecessary pressure on public services, but faces a sensible restart of the season to support the economic and morale benefits associated with the sport. However, the latest stumbling block for a return is London Mayor Sadiq Khan. He says it's too early to contemplate elite level football happening in the English capital. About a quarter of games are due to take place in London. The Independent's Miguel Delaney joined this morning's OTBAM, and he was asked how the Premier League would respond if a Dynamo Dresden mass outbreak event occurred.
So I asked Masters that yesterday. So he was aware of the Dresden situation, but not fully aware of all the details. He didn't quite go into what will happen when the league resumes for this. It was more about what happens now with the training. And he said that if one player was tested positive, the player himself would have to go into quarantine, but the team wouldn't, because even in training, they're gonna go by certain social distancing laws, and then they have all their reliance from what I mean. This is me filling in the gaps now. They've been from what I've heard, they've been using studies and certain sciences about even when you're playing football in an outside environment, how long you're actually in contact with, or how long you're close to other people. Even kind of transmission through the air. So I think that at least informs some of the thinking. But in terms of what there would be what would happen with a positive case, for the moment, for the training situation, it's just that one player would go into quarantine.
Do you think we could see players playing with masks?
That hasn't been broached yet, but not that I've heard it's been broached. I'm sure it's come up. Given that nearly everything has come up in these discussions, because they've been trying anything to find a solution. The message has been everything on the table. I think going from the science I've heard they're using, and even kind of Tebas alluded to this on Sunday with Spain, I don't think so, but I think managers will.
More Miguel Delaney to come on the football show. A few texts in on getting angry and playing sport. Even in a non-contact sport, you need to have a cutthroat approach if you want to be the best. Some people only want to be good or compete at a certain level, but if you're only content, if you're the very, very best, then you need to be a killer on the court, says James. Rory in Dublin, how many Buddha-like figures reach the top of their game? Anytime I played my best, I was helped by generating a hatred for my opponent. And we're talking local tennis club level here. My mother never stood a chance, says Rory in Dublin. Roberto Baggio has been mentioned by
An
Richie.
actual Buddhist. Yeah.
An actual Buddhist.
Yeah.
I would think Roger Federer jumps to mind as somebody who probably didn't get irate or angry and vengeful. Now that's different, before anyone takes in, to not being cutthroat. That is different to not being cutthroat and a killer on the court. I'm talking about Roger Federer over a slight that he made up in his own head, spending 24 hours saying he's going to kill that kid. And, that is different to being ruthless. Like, Michael Jordan should not have even cared who this kid was, is my point. And he would have looked at himself in the mirror and must have said on some level, you're making this up. This actually never happened. But he's still going ahead with it.
To be fair, Roger Federer has been known to cure the sick with his backhand, so I don't think that's necessarily happened, that he's gone out to hurt people.
Yeah.
And Jordan didn't even need to stoop to these
no, this was needless
to say. And he's got, on top of his unbelievable talent, which brings with it reputational pressure. And Tiger Woods is probably the best example of this, where other players look at the leaderboard and see him and they're like, oh, geez. Yeah. It was the same with Jordan. If the game's in clutch time and it's all square, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So there was no need for Bradford Smith, who, interestingly, in his soundings since this documentary, has been saying, he actually went out of his way not to engage with Jordan after that game, just to make a point of, because this was so obviously the done thing where Jordan was coming out in the media saying, well, such and such said this, so I had to show him.
Yeah.
So little LeBradford Smith was wise beyond his years, and it still didn't work. So
Apparently, LeBradford Smith went to the reporters after the first game and said, "Don't make a big deal out of my performance," because he knew. Somebody says, Aidan in Roscommon, I agree that you can raise your game by getting angry. I played for my golf club in the Connacht final. I was playing shite until one of the other team pissed me off, and then I played out of my skin, says Aidan in Roscommon. There's no doubt it's effective. Like, I'm not even being remotely critical here of Jordan for using this. It's just fascinating that even at that level, when you're that talented, this is the fuel you need. Like, we sort of on the show roll our eyes now at the thought of saying something that can be put up on the dressing room wall and that gets the opposition's blood boiling. But actually what the Jordan documentary shows is it's unbelievably effective and probably always will be.
But you can kind of understand it from a Roy of the Rovers, like a Scott Parker example, where it's like a box-to-box midfielder who likes to get stuck in. But as you mentioned, this is a game reliant on, deftness and finesse and technique, where you'd think, it would throw you off your game to have your blood boiling. So that's the thing I can't really reconcile.
That's what me too, where he's like, I'm going to crush you, I'm going to kill you. And then it's like faint step, touch, turns back, and then, he's falling backwards and lands one in the hoop. And you're thinking, well, that's not really, I get Roy Keane crushing into somebody, but Jordan, just it's fascinating more than anything.
Well, to a degree, that you could argue that anger quashes any nerves or any second thoughts you might have about your actions.
Yeah.
Because when you're relying on such deftness and such kind of swift movement, etc., then you might be second guessing yourself. You might be, thinking twice about what you're going to do. Whereas if you're just operating angry, it would eliminate the thought to second guess things. You literally just go through and have a one-track mind about it.
A certain single-minded focus. Yeah.
On next week's shows, presumably 1997 NBA Finals, he has probably the most famous game of his career, the flu game. Whether he had the flu, I'm not sure. Like, there's conspiracies that he was hungover, or he had food poisoning and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
As Richie said he picks it out as one of his best games because he had nothing else to focus on. He felt so dreadful that he had to basically all the energy he had, he focused on playing basketball that night, and he was able to channel it and produced one of his best ever performances. So people can look out for that next week.
Okay, great. Well, there is that saying, beware the injured golfer, because he's so focused on the injury and, kind of just getting around that he or she ends up playing great stuff. Ulster have announced contract extensions, Rich.
Yeah, a pair of internationals, Will Addison and Geordie Murphy, both signing 2-year deals at Ulster. Head coach Dan McFarlane says he's building a squad that can improve on this season's performances. The Heineken Champions Cup quarter-finalists have also confirmed the addition of Ian Madigan and Albie Mathewson ahead of next season. While Pro 14 organisers remain hopeful of completing the current season this side of 2021, the competition is currently suspended as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But Commercial Director Dermot Rigney said today that they are planning behind the scenes with the ambition of resuming this year. Tries scored by grounding the ball against the padded post protector will no longer be allowed under new World Rugby rule changes. World Rugby says the law change comes into effect immediately. They claim it had become unsafe for some teams to defend against those tries. They've also held the impact of a trial in the French community leagues banning tackles above waist height. They say it has resulted in a 3-fold decrease in injuries and a 60% reduction in concussion in the French community game.
Is that a high standard of rugby, do you know, Rich? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot there, that French league.
Off the top of my head, I think it is, it disqualifies the top 14 and the D2. I think we're down into sub-third division stuff, so it'd be like 4th division and then around the regions. So I don't think necessarily it's a great quality of game, but it is one that will be played by the masses.
Yeah.
So your local club would be the ones that would be engaging in those rule changes if you're playing in France. But those success rates they're hailing as really, really good. There are other real changes in there. The 50-22 one that they'd brought in as well, saying it's going well. Those are the only two they highlighted. There was a list, I think, put up by World Rugby of about 5 or 6, maybe more. Earlier on, they were going to trial during the year, but they just highlighted the French Community League, not New Zealand, etc., where they were also trialing these things. And they said that so far it's been a great success.
No, it's very interesting because famously or infamously, there was a similar trial in 2018, late 2018. It was meant to be for the season in the Championship Cup level across the UK. And it was abandoned pretty early on in the trial, I suppose, the experiment, because actually it turned out that the number of concussions had jumped up by about 60%. And it was similar rule, lowering the tackle height right down. Apparently around the breakdown in particular, both the tackler and the carrier were bent at the waist and it was causing havoc. And so they just had to stop the trial because it was proving dangerous. So that's very interesting. That in France it seems to have had different results. We might touch on that again at some stage. Meanwhile, in Scotland, what's going on?
Your favourite, Joe. Your favourite. Rangers have failed in a bid.
It's just, I've listened at length to what's going on in Scotland, and yet if you said to me, I'll give you an enormous sum of money if you can sum up in a line or two what's going on in Scotland, I'd have to pass. I just can't. What is actually going on?
Do you know what? We'll hear from Neil Doncaster in a moment, but he raised a good point in the interview he gave with Sky earlier on. He was saying that there's more interest in this because it's operating in a vacuum. Like, there's literally no other news.
There's no interest in this.
Suddenly people are increasing their interest in the minutiae of Scottish football governance.
Nobody has been following this.
If you can follow, if you can point out Stranraer on a map to me, Joe, between now and the end of this story, you'll be doing well. Rangers, meanwhile, have failed in their bids to force an independent investigation into the SPFL. The Ibrox club had joined with Hearts and the aforementioned Stranraer in calling for a general meeting after the lower league season was controversially ended last month. Only 13 of the 32 clubs needed voted to pass the resolution, and SPFL Chief Executive Neil Doncaster says that sends a clear message.
It's important that everyone respects the vote, the very clear vote that took place today. The members, ultimately, members' organisation, and as a members' organisation, the members are in charge, and we are very much riding to their orders. That's the nature of a league, and the league's members, the 42 clubs, have given a very clear steer that they want to move on. And I do hope that everyone, including the 13 who voted in favour of the resolution today, are happy to draw a line under the issue and move forward together, because if we remain have different opinions, then we're going to struggle to get the game back up and running as soon as possible. It's vital that we come together, and it's vital that we've moved beyond where we've been and we start to move forward together.
Ronan, Mullen, what's your hot take on some of the minutiae of this resolution?
Joe, I haven't got much for you on the Scottish side of things. I'm not going to lie.
Precisely. We're banning this story.
The Premier League, which I actually have been able to follow to some extent, even though, as you mentioned, it's changing on a daily basis. I think if Liverpool hadn't been running away with the league, this wouldn't be as much of an issue as it probably is, because from a sporting merit point of view, quote unquote, the only thing that is really of interest is relegation, because the Champions League, we don't even know what that is currently. Like, the current Champions League hasn't been sorted out, so when will next season be? When will the next one be, rather? So relegation is the only one, and that's the most financially grave element of this whole thing. So they're obviously the teams that don't want the resolution to pass as it stands. So I think that's the Premier League, I think, could get more interesting as the days go by.
Yeah, well, they have until May 25th to sort this whole thing out. Last couple of stories, Rich. So Sebastian Vettel.
He's away from Ferrari at the end of this season. Ferrari announcing that today. Team bosses say it's a joint decision, although the two sides have been in talks over a potential new contract. Vettel won 4 world titles in a row at Red Bull, but he hasn't managed to repeat the success since joining Ferrari in 2015.
Presumably because the car isn't as good, as opposed to Vettel has gone off a cliff?
The car hadn't been as good, improving over the last year or two is my take on the story. But Leclerc as well has been a rising force in Ferrari over the course of last year or so as well. So there was talk of making him number 1 driver next year, which I don't think would have gone down well with Vettel. So he's going to head off away from the car, from the manufacturers for next season. And Clermont's president, Eric de Cromier, has quashed talk of a potential boycott of the Heineken Champions Cup by French clubs. It was reported that the top 14 were lobbying to see their allocation increase from 6 to 8 teams for next season. However, de Cromier says talk of a boycott is unfounded and will be disrespectful to both the Pro 14 and the English Premiership. When asked by French radio station RMC today if a boycott was possible, de Cromier added, "If my auntie had balls, she'd be my uncle."
Oh yes, Liam Brady, come on in.
Yep.
A much underused phrase.
An actual quote. I read it as well in French first, and I was like, yes, I can't believe this has been resurrected. Fantastic. Thank you, Eric de Cromier.
Oh, dear. Okay, Richie, thanks for that. Ronan, Mullen, pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers, Joe.
Cheers, lads. So you might have seen sport is beginning to re-emerge, certainly in the United States. They're ploughing ahead. States are reopening, and UFC 249 took place in Florida over the weekend. Kevin Aioli of Yahoo Sports is going to talk to us about it next.
Wayne McCulloch's going to get seriously hurt, I'm telling you now. And I think it will be his last fight, being honest with you. I'm going to smash Wayne McCulloch up to bits.
Well, I think Nazim's all about talking. He just tries to get inside your head.